Welcome everyone. This is SCORE Southwest Missouri's Tuesdays at 2 webinar series. We do this webinar series in partnership with the Springfield Greene County Library District. If you're not aware, the library does offer resources for businesses. You can visit thelibrary.org/business to learn more about that. And this is from Zoom to the boardroom to the stage, using your voice to your best advantage with our presenter, Dr. Heather Nelson, and we'll introduce her in just a moment. I'd like to tell you a little bit about SCORE before we get started on that. My name is Katie Pattison. I'm the workshop chair for SCORE Southwest Missouri. I also happen to work for the Springfield Greene County Library, coordinate business resources for the library, and manage the Schweitzer Brentwood branch. So if you are not familiar with SCORE, I want to let you know that SCORE is there for you for the life of your business. SCORE is a nationwide nonprofit that offers mentoring and resources to support you from idea to exit. There are three major ways that SCORE helps small businesses. We provide free business advice and mentoring. You can request a SCORE mentor. It's free to have a SCORE mentor. We can match you with somebody that meets your needs and can help you answer questions about starting your business, growing your business, exiting your business, or any kind of business needs you have. We also offer low or no cost business training, just like the workshop you're in today. And if you're not aware, SCORE has an amazing library of business templates and resources on the SCORE website. You can find those at score.org. There are things like on-demand courses, recorded courses, all kinds of great stuff. So if you have a question about your business or something you're starting to explore, definitely check out that website. You'll probably find something there that will help you. These are some upcoming workshops from SCORE Southwest Missouri. So next week we have credit strategies for small business owners with Mary Overby from Borealis Consulting. That is next Tuesday, the 15th at 7 p.m. That is at the Library Center here in Springfield, Missouri, or you can attend it virtually if you like. We also have our next Tuesdays at 2 coming up on the 22nd, of course, at 2 p.m. That is recruitment and retention strategies for small business owners with Elizabeth Hurst from HR Advantage. You can sign up for either of those courses or any of our upcoming courses at swmissouri.score.org. That's our SCORE local chapter website. And everything SCORE does is possible with the effort of volunteers. SCORE has over 10,000 volunteers serving clients in over 1,500 communities. If you would like to make a difference in your business community and you have some knowledge to share, we would love to tell you more about volunteering with SCORE. You can reach out to me in the chat, or you can visit our website at swmissouri.score.org. So do contact us today to request a mentor, to use some of those resources we talked about, to sign up for some of those classes we talked about. You can do all of that at our chapter website. Now I would like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Heather Nelson. Dr. Nelson is a mezzo-soprano. She loves everything about the human voice. She's based in Springfield, Missouri, works with voice teachers and singers from all over the world, seeking to understand the inner workings of the voice, and helps them use that knowledge to make a positive difference in their teaching and singing. She enjoys cooking and eating, me too, Heather, good food, British TV, and spending time with her favorite dynamic duo, Dewey the dog and Sis the cat. We might need pictures later, or if they're around, we might need to see them, Heather. Find more information about Dr. Nelson on her Instagram page. You see it there on the screen, Dr. Heather Nelson, or on her website, drheathernelson.com. Welcome.
Thank you. The cat might actually make an appearance later because you know, she tends to like to be involved in anything that I'm doing. So if you hear her yelling at me, it's because she's come into the room and wanted to make herself known. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to be able to present this today. Like Katie mentioned, I'm here in Springfield, Missouri. I am enjoying watching the snow melt minute by minute outside my window and enjoying some warm temperatures and sunshine today. I hope you're all having a wonderful day as well. I'm going to start to share my screen. While I get that going, I'd love to encourage you to put any questions that you have into the chat, and I will either address them as we go or more likely at the end. But if there's something that's super pressing, feel free to raise your hand or somehow or another make it make it obvious that it's urgent in the chat, and Katie's going to help moderate that for me. So we are talking today from Zoom to the boardroom to the stage, using your voice to your best advantage. We don't consider it all of the time, but our voice is a huge part of our identity and brand. And whether we like it or not, people are going to form conclusions about you based on your voice. So using your voice well and taking care of it for the long term can help you build confidence in yourself, and actually can help boost your clients' confidence in you as well. We're going to talk about why that is in a bit. Now, Katie already introduced me, but just so that you know a little bit more, I'm Dr. Heather Nelson, vocologist, so you can Google that, or just find me online at Dr. Heather Nelson. But Heather Nelson is kind of a common name, so if you just Google Heather Nelson, you're going to come up with a lot of things. I am a vocologist, and what that is that's just a fancy term for being a voice teacher who has done a lot of extra study in the physiology and the inner workings of the voice. I have a PhD in voice science and vocal pedagogy. Pedagogy is the study of teaching. So I've done a lot of in-depth work into how to teach singers well. I was trained by a laryngologist to work with singers who've had some sort of a vocal diagnosis, whether that be an injury or some sort of a chronic something that's going on that makes their singing difficult. And so I love to work with like super tricky problems in the voice. But one of the things that we have found through just practice and through research is that we do better when we start taking care of our voices on the front end rather than trying to solve problems on the back end. I'm going to talk a little bit about how things can go wrong with a voice and why we want to prevent them. But if you yourself have ever experienced any vocal issues, please know that there is help. I'm one of those people that if you reach out to me, if I can't help you, I know who to ask and how to point you in the right direction. And I'd be happy to do that because our voices are so important to running our business as well. As I mentioned a little bit ago, people can form conclusions about you based on your voice. We can either try to fight that or we can just acknowledge and work with it. I'm hoping that as years go on, people will be less likely to form snap judgments based on vocal characteristics, but we know that just tends to happen. And so it's important to be aware of some of those things that people can perceive about you based on your voice. And, if they need to be changed, we change them. And if not, we mitigate them through other types of things. Research shows, I'm a big research nerd, that comes with having a PhD, but research shows that people will judge your personality based on the volume of your speaking voice. For instance, a lot of people will assume a person who has a loud voice to be more extroverted. If we carry that on to a further conclusion, a lot of times people assume extroverts are more capable, are more confident, and will tend to prefer working with extroverts over introverts in some types of situations. I'm an introvert, so that's unfortunate, but that's one of the things that we have seen in research. Skipping to the third point there, the pitch of your voice can also influence people's perceptions of your own trustworthiness. For example, if you have a super high voice, people tend to not think of you as trustworthy. They tend to associate that with childlikeness or immaturity. Likewise, people who have a low voice, particularly male voices, that tends to give people a perception of being capable and trustworthy. We run into this as females, unfortunately, because sometimes we will try to lower our voice pitch in order to seem more authoritative or trustworthy. That can sometimes get us into some vocal trouble. That middle point, people with dysphonic voices, and dysphonia is a huge umbrella term that just means anything is not working correctly with the voice. That can be anything from a temporary situation, like my voice is super gravelly because I've got a cold or I've been coughing a lot, and you have that kind of husky or hoarse voice, all the way to complete voice loss from some sort of an injury or an illness or trauma that has happened to the voice. So it's a huge range of things that can go wonky with the voice when we talk about dysphonia. However, if you have particularly chronic dysphonia, that can give an impression to people that you are less trustworthy or capable. And unfortunately, that tends to be amplified if you happen to identify as female. Our voice is a part of our identity. And we don't think about it, I think, a lot in business so much, unless you are someone who makes a living by your voice. But here's the thing. If you are using your voice in any sort of capacity in your business, if you're making phone calls, if you're making presentations, I'm doing it right now. And as a singer, my voice is literally my job. But anything that if there's an essential part of your business that requires your voice, you are a professional voice user, and your voice can become a part of your business identity. It's also a part of your personal identity. You no doubt have people in your life that can identify you simply by the sound of your voice, often in just a word or two. And you have people in your life that you can recognize just by the sound of their voice without seeing them or being in the same room. Even if they happen to be ill, the timbre of their voice is still enough the same that you can identify who they are. And when things go wrong with the voice, and I know I'm talking about that a little bit, things can go wrong with the voice, particularly if there are permanent changes that can actually bring about a bit of a crisis of identity. Um, and I've had to help singers through that as they have worked through injury. And for people who sometimes have chronic illnesses like Parkinson's or MS that have permanent changes to the voice, that can be a pretty tough thing to deal with. So it's important to acknowledge that taking care of your voice matters, because if you have issues with your voice, it can affect all aspects of your life. And so we want to consider taking care of your voice just like you would care for your body and for your mental health as well. While we don't often talk about things like voice overuse in business circles, at least it hasn't been my experience, we can run the risk of leading to some permanent changes if things are allowed to continue in the voice that can become permanent. So things like voice overuse, where you're just talking too much, too loud or too low, those types of things, if there are not just temporary things like having a cold or allergies or something like that, can eventually lead to changes in the tissue. Sometimes you may have heard people talk about vocal nodules or nodes or polyps or things like that. That's what those things are. They are changes in the tissue of the vocal mechanism that can lead to permanent issues if they aren't addressed. And almost every vocal issue has a solution if we get to it soon enough. Voice problems in particular can hamper your ability to communicate effectively. We have some research, whoops, sorry. We have some research, and a lot of this research that I'm pulling from has been done with teachers. Teachers are a profession where voice changes are considered to be a pretty high incidence. So in voice clinics, for example, about 40% of the population in voice clinics happen to be teachers. And the highest percentage of that happens to be music teachers. But beyond that, we know that just any profession that uses their voice as as an essential part of their job can have issues with their voice that may need some outside help. Even a small amount of dysphonia has been shown in teachers to impact student learning, particularly in noisy environments, simply because students can't understand. And if we take that to other situations, which frankly hasn't been studied yet, I think it needs to be studied. But if you have a speaker who has a little bit of dysphonia, it makes the ability to understand their voice lessened by quite a lot. And it doesn't take much change for that to happen. Dysphonia has also been shown to reduce speakers' confidence in themselves. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes a louder voice can give an impression of confidence, but if you have a dysphonic voice, you may not be able to project your voice very well, and that can lessen the speaker's confidence. Voice changes are also a quality of life issue. People who have been shown to have voice changes will self-identify as having more depression, will also rate themselves lower on all aspects of health, whether physical health, mental health, or even emotional health. So voice changes really are a quality of life issue. This is the last time I think I'll talk about this, but if you notice any voice changes that are not attributable to anything in particular, we're talking illness, allergies, which can really do a number on your voice, or if you have temporary overuse, like for instance, if you go to a ball game and you are yelling at the other team or yelling at the refs a little too much, you know that your voice is probably going to be fine in the next couple of days. But if those changes linger for more than a couple of weeks or so, it's a good idea to start seeking out help sooner rather than later. Now, when you are specifically looking for help with your voice, the ENT office is generally where people would go, ear, nose, and throat. For voice troubles in particular, you're going to want to seek out a laryngologist. That is the voice specialist. Now, the ear, nose, and throat clinic, those are three hugely complicated systems, the ear, the nose, and the throat. And generally speaking, while they may be excellent at their job, you don't really want to see an ear specialist when you're having voice troubles. So if you do happen to need to seek out help for this, call up the office, ask who the voice specialist is, and try to make an appointment with them. There are also voice clinics, particularly in major cities, often associated with the university, where the whole office is focused on the voice. You'll have laryngologists and SLPs, speech language pathologists, that are focused on the voice. And just believe me, it'll save you a lot of time and headache if you get to the right specialist from the get-go instead of having to try to figure it out with someone who doesn't quite have the expertise in a voice. If you need help with that, send me a message through my website. I can help you find someone in your area, or if you're willing to travel a bit, I can point you in the direction of someone who might be able to help. Now, specifically what we're getting into today, our own voice needs change based on what we're doing and whatever environment that we're in. We don't want to speak the same way in a one-on-one setting as we would in a stadium. It doesn't work. We are going to either end up yelling at the person that's across the desk from us, or we won't be understood in a stadium setting. Now, granted, I don't know many of us who do business presentations in a stadium, although I've sung in a stadium before, and it is a whole different experience than singing at home in my studio. So even as a singer, I've had to adjust my vocal technique to different environments. Knowing ahead of time how to mitigate any changes to our voice before we go into a different environment can make us much more successful and better communicators overall. So let's talk first about one-on-one settings. Many of us, especially who are entrepreneurs, are going to be doing quite a lot of talking one-on-one to people. If you have clients that you meet with one-on-one, I saw someone earlier who's a nutrition coach. This may be a great example for you that you're going to meet one-on-one with a client, sitting down and talking about whatever their needs are. When you are a voice teacher like I am, this is also how we spend a good deal of our time talking one-on-one, singer to singer. A couple of things that you want to be aware of. The first is ambient noise. Ambient noise is anything that is in the environment that is making noise. It's and it can be a lot of different things. Right here in the room that I'm in, I'm hearing the fan on my computer, and so it is it's just kind of a constant noise. You might have some street noise outside, or if you are in a classroom talking one-on-one to someone, you may have noise out in the hallway still. All of those things are ambient noise. Why we want to be concerned about ambient noise is because of this thing called the Lombard effect. That's Lombard if you want to Google it, because it's super interesting. We've known about this for over 100 years. A French scientist named Lombard first wrote about it back in, I believe, in the 1920s. And what this means is that in the presence of ambient noise, people will have a tendency to raise their voice in order to combat that noise. And they usually do it without ever noticing it. Why we do this is because we found in subsequent research that we have two centers in our brain that decide how loud we're going to speak. We have a center in the front of the brain where we plan to speak louder or softer based on whatever situation we're in, for singers too. But we also have the center in the brain in our brain stem that is reflexive, that's the same area of the brain where our heart rate, our breathing is controlled, and so it's back here and it's totally a reflex. And so even right now, as I know that this fan is blowing in front of my computer, I'm trying to be aware of the volume of my speech because my brain will tell me I need to raise my volume in order to combat that noise. By being aware of it, I can mitigate it a little bit. So think about the room that you're going to be in, even in a one-on-one situation. Notice what is making noise and be aware of it. Now, brains are one of my favorite things, but they can also sometimes be a little bit of a jerk. um, we are hearing all of the noises in a room, but our brain takes all of the information in and then filters it and decides what's important. So I may not always be aware that the fan in my computer is blowing, but my brain is still hearing it. It's just not listening to it. And so that ambient noise is usually sounds that the brain is hearing but not listening to. And so we do have to consciously be aware of or take pains to listen for ambient noise. So just as an exercise, maybe sometime later today, just sit quietly in a room and see what noises that you hear that maybe you weren't aware of earlier, and know that you may, if you were in a speaking situation, want to combat that noise. Note also that we've done a fair amount of psychological study. And we have found that when people are trying to be convincing, they will often raise their voice to a higher volume, especially if you're female. We tend to, as females, we tend to try to be sometimes a bit more forceful, especially when talking to someone of the opposite gender. But know that that is a possibility that we may unconsciously try to raise our voice in order to be more convincing. Likewise, in order to sound more authoritative, we may try to pitch our voice a bit lower to sound like we really know what we're talking about. This can be a bit of a tricky thing to do to the voice. This can cause vocal fatigue faster when we're talking louder but lower. Notice also the rate of your speech and how often you're taking breaths. We want to consider breath to be the gas in our vocal motor. And so if you consider, like, if you've got problems with your gas line in the car, you can mash down on the gas and it may not go very far very fast. And if you don't have enough breath underneath your vocal cords, if there's not enough breath to support it, the muscles are having to work harder. And if we give them enough breath, they don't have to work quite as hard to either get volume or to just last as long as we need them to. In order to optimize speaking one-on-one, try to stay in your optimal speech pitch range. And here's where you find that. I've already talked about how we tend to speak too low. So if we want to stay in our optimal speech pitch range, that's going to allow us to speak longer without wearing out. And it just keeps us really in the center of our vocal identity as well. We're not trying to artificially change our voice in order to give different impressions of ourselves. So the way to find your optimal speech pitch range is to notice where you say hello when you answer the phone. So when you pick up the phone and you say hello, or if you were to say words that you don't generally think about, like okay, those types of words, that's where your voice loves to live, and you can speak a lot longer staying in that pitch range. I happen to have a slightly higher natural pitch to my voice, and so I try to stay in that range as much as possible so that my voice doesn't wear out too fast. You can also slow down the rate of speech and then try to articulate well without sounding too much like a robot. This is particularly important if you happen to be wearing a mask, which I'll talk about in just a second. If you happen to move into a small room where you have, say, up to 5 to 8 people or so, without amplification, generally speaking, you want to be aware of the same types of things. Be aware of the ambient noise in the room and the tendency you might have to speak lower and louder. And you want to try to avoid vocal fry, especially when trying to project your voice. You might have heard about vocal fry, which is a legitimate register in the voice. If we think about the registers of the voice, kind of like gears in a car. Vocal fry is a very low gear in the voice, and it's this type of sound where you're it's that poppy, gravelly sound where the vocal folds are moving so slowly together that you can actually hear the individual contacts of the voice. Each one of those pops as the vocal folds contacting each other. That would be opposed to what I'm speaking in right now, which is more of my middle or chest range. And this up high, that would be more of my head range or my even a falsetto if I were a male. We want to tend to avoid vocal fry, which is a tendency that we have culturally right now. People will generally drop into vocal fry at the ends of phrases where they will like speak a phrase and at the end they just kind of drop off to that. Um, Vocal fry is not dangerous. It's not harmful. There has been some talk, some limited research that people can judge someone who's speaking in vocal fry as lazy or whatever. It's really just kind of a cultural thing that we have going on right now. It's opposed to like back in the 80s or the 90s when we had like Valley speak, and that was kind of the cultural thing that was happening. Right nowadays, we have more vocal fry in our kind of cultural vocal qualities. It's not harmful until you try to make that sound loud. When you try to project vocal fry, because the vocal folds are moving so slowly and they have a lot less air moving through them, that can cause vocal fatigue a lot faster than if you were to use a full voice without that vocal fry, particularly at the ends of phrases. So be aware, if you can, try to keep the ends of phrases pretty consistent in pitch all the way through to the end of the phrase. In a small meeting room, you want to think about increasing your breath support more than you probably would in a one-on-one setting. And so some ways that you can practice that are to just breathe in a little bit more deeply with each phrase that you would start to speak. Think about particularly breathing low enough in your body and enough that you can feel the lower part of your rib cage actually expanding. A way that you might test that out, for example, if you were to put your hands on top of your head just like this, and I can't see any of you on your camera, so you can do this in the wherever you are, and then keep your shoulders relaxed, and then just breathe in and feel where those muscles down at the lower part of your rib cage expand. They don't need to come all the way out, just a little bit of expansion there. That will allow for a little bit more breath to go into your lungs and a little more gas in the system. Again, slow your speech down, especially if you're wearing a mask. We know that masks are, of course, needed in many indoor environments when you're meeting with lots of people, but they can hinder the sound that's coming from your mouth, depending on the material that the mask is made of. If you happen to be wearing two masks, double masking, that can dampen the sound by several decibels. It also takes away the visual aspect of your speech, because when we're speaking with someone, we use our eyes and our ears to listen to them. And so when we take away the visual aspect of speech, it can take people's brains just a little bit longer to perceive what someone is saying. So slowing down your speech, articulating well, that can help to mitigate the effect that the mask would have on your speech. And you might consider, most small rooms like this don't have amplification, but you might consider bringing your own. I have a personal amplification system that is just a small little speaker and a little boom mic. Mine happens to be wired, and so I just connect it into there, and then it has a clip on it that I can put onto my belt, or I use it when I'm conducting choir, so I'll clip it to the front of my stand. And all that does is it just amplifies my voice. This one is battery operated, or it's chargeable, so I charge it up ahead of time and then I can use it. You can get ones that are Bluetooth so that you don't have to have the wire. And what this does is I mean, it's pretty simple. All it does is it makes your voice louder, so you don't have to work so hard to project your voice. This can also be really, really helpful for folks whom you might be meeting with that have hearing difficulties. And here's where I would really encourage people to consider using personal amplification as a regular part of their meeting getup. Because sometimes it's not a matter of how well or how loud we're speaking, it's a matter of how well people are hearing. And if we have people in the room who can't hear very well and we're not helping them to hear us, that can actually lead to some ableism where we just assume that our voice is enough when it's really their ears that need a little bit of help. Moving on to a large audience without amplification. When we get into a larger room, and this was where a lot of my dissertation research came from, so I love talking about this topic. Acoustics and the brain, super fascinating. I could go on for hours, but today I will not, I promise. But when you get into a larger room, the reflections and the reverberation in that room are vastly different from smaller spaces. And our brains listen for that acoustical feedback. When we're in a small room, I'm in a room that's about 12 by 12 right now, and it's a fairly ringy room just because I don't have anything on the walls. I use this room to sing in, so I keep it pretty ringy as much as I can. From a room this size, I'm getting a reflection from the wall in about 25 millisecond or 20.25 of a second. So about a quarter of a second, the sound from my mouth is going back to the wall and back to my ear. My brain loves that, loves that amount of feedback, and it knows it can hear itself. It's also getting bone conduction. But when I get into a larger room and those walls get further away, the sound waves take longer to get to the wall and bounce back. And that difference in time from the bone conduction from my mouth to the ear and then from the wall to my ear makes the brain kind of question what is going on. And so very often the brain will try to get you to slow down so that it can hear itself, or it will get you to try to speak louder so that like the brain's like, maybe you're not speaking loud enough, and try to get you to talk louder so that it can get that kind of feedback. So you might consider when you get into a larger room, trying to face a wall that's closer to you rather than a wall that's farthest away. You may not be able to do that based on the size of the room or whatever, but just notice where the walls are and where any acoustical feedback may be coming from. A really, really easy way to help your brain out here is to just hold up a book or hold up a folder or something. And if you even do that right now, if you have something in front of you where you can pick it up, if you hold it up in front of you, you'll notice that the sound changes. You'll be able to hear yourself better. And you can hold it down underneath your chin and you'll still get a little bit more acoustical feedback. And that can help your brain not to try to do anything wonky to your voice in order to combat the longer reverberation times in the room. Again, you want to notice where there are any ambient noise sources around you. In larger rooms, you may have large fluorescent lights or large HVAC systems that are a little bit louder. Crowd noise, particularly if you are in a convention type setting, you may have people that are milling around and not paying attention to the great things you're saying. But that crowd noise or those HVAC systems are ambient noise that you may try to combat. Notice again in the tendency of large spaces, we want to fill the room with our voice. So you may have the tendency to raise the pitch of your voice and increase your volume. That's essentially yelling. So in a large space without amplification, you may try to just yell to be heard, and that usually doesn't work. Try to keep your voice in the optimal speech range, slow your speech down. You can increase your breath support again. In fact, if you need to, just take a couple breaths with your hands on top of your head during a sound check if you can, and see if you can get your breath going. Try to take adequate pauses so that you do have enough time to breathe and so that you have enough time for your voice to carry to your audience so they can take in what you're saying and process it. If possible, if you have the opportunity to do a sound check ahead of time, have someone stand around the room in various places and listen and see if they can hear you. And if they can, then you know you don't have to talk any louder. Warm up your voice before speaking. I'll give you some tips on how to do that in just a few minutes. And if at all possible, consider using amplification. Not only will that be easier on your voice, but it could also be a lot easier on your audience so they can hear you adequately. If you happen to be in front of a large audience and you do have amplification, count your lucky stars because that will make your life a whole lot easier. When you're in a large space, adjust your speaking to a more one-on-one conversational level. You don't have to work that hard to project your voice when there's amplification. But still be aware that because of psychology, your brain may still try to fill the space and will make you want to sing, to speak louder in order to fill the space, even though your voice is amplified. Try to find where that acoustical feedback is going to come from. If you have a monitor, try to adjust it so that you can hear it adequately and that you are not trying to get reflections from the back wall and from the monitors. If you have it a little closer to you, that can make your life a little bit easier. Again, warm up your voice ahead of time and trust the mic to do the work. The mic is going to be the big part of getting your voice out into a large room like that. And lastly, if you happen to be on Zoom, just like we are today, or whatever platform you choose, notice that we tend to have the habit of leaning forward when we're speaking. I'm doing it right now, I know, but we're trying to kind of often get close to our audience. And so when we do that, that can add some tension into our neck, into our back and our shoulders. And tension like that, when we have it back here, can increase tension in the vocal mechanism because it's trying to kind of brace against it. So notice that and try to find ways that you can to have good posture while you're sitting and talking on Zoom or standing and talking on Zoom. This is where I think we're going to learn a lot in the next few years. Our brains really are not used to talking to like disembodied voices on screens. We were not made for conversation like this, but I think we're going to find in the next few years, particularly in vocal research, that we're going to find that there's some funky stuff that's happening like that. If you consider the size of the person that's on your screen, more often than not, when we're talking to a person who looks that size, they're quite a distance away from us. And so I have a tendency to think, and I will admit here, I don't have data to back this up yet, but if anybody wants to give me research money, I would take it, because I think we're going to have a tendency to, again, raise our voices so that we can be heard by this person who is far away from us, when in reality, they're probably only a few inches from our face. But what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and what we're speaking are not quite matching up yet. And so I think we have a little bit of brain development to really kind of catch up to how we are communicating on online spaces right now. Headphones can help, and you want headphones that fit your head, fit your ears well. I tend to have like very small ear canals, so like earbuds do not work, but headphones, particularly open back ones, can be very helpful for allowing you to hear what's going on in a little bit more encompassing way, so it sounds a little bit more conversational than from your speaker. When you are wearing headphones, be aware that you do want to use both ears. It has been shown that using one ear, like one ear on and one ear off, can actually lead to us turning up the volume, which can lead to hearing loss if you are wearing headphones for long periods of time. And if they are open back, that can add ambient noise from the room into the headphones so that you don't feel like you're just in a box. Again, on Zoom, you want to use your optimum speech pitch range. That's hard to say fast, sorry, and use adequate breath support. Consider that you are talking in a way that feels very distant from other people. And so even though you're talking to something that is very, very close to you, perceptually it may feel very distant. And so you may have a tendency to speak as if someone was distant from you. Our big fatigue traps that can get us into some vocal trouble is speaking too high or low, just basically out of your optimal range, too loud, too long, and with not enough gas in the system. So if you can avoid these things, you're going to be less likely to wear your voice out. Now, there are some things too that I didn't list here that can be tricky. Dehydration for one, if your vocal folds are mostly water, just like almost everything else in your body. And so if you are not drinking enough water, that can wear the muscles out a little bit faster. And note, because of the way our bodies are hydrating, we need to drink at least 3 hours in advance before it really gets into the vocal system. And there's been some, like I would say, old wives' tales that have been floating around for a long, long, long time, that you don't want to drink milk before you sing or before you speak because it creates mucus. And that's actually not universally true. Milk could create some more mucus in your system. Sorry if that grosses you out. But if you have, say, just a trigger to dairy products, the same thing with spicy food or with caffeine. Generally, they don't do anything to the voice unless you personally have a reaction to those types of things. So we don't have a lot of good solid backup to those old wives' tales that have been going around for a long, long time about milk or caffeine or spicy food about the voice. It's all really how your body reacts to it. So you don't necessarily have to avoid drinking a giant cup of coffee before you give a presentation if your body loves the coffee. Mine does. So here are some really easy vocal warm-ups that you can do just about anywhere in order to prepare your voice well for speaking in front of one person or 10 people or 1,000 people. Because your voice is a muscle system and because it works very, very, very hard, we want to consider it like we might an athlete who's getting ready to run a long race. We would not tend to take like a long run if we were going to walk 10,000 steps in one big go without warming up our muscles first. Our large muscles, we're pretty good about knowing what we need to do to take care of our large muscles, but we don't really focus on those tiny, tiny muscles quite as much, but they actually do a whole lot more work than some of our large muscles. Our vocal muscles are basically shaped like a V, and they vibrate together in order to make sound. We have done some measuring, and for people who do a lot of heavy speaking, for instance, a teacher, we have done some measurements on teachers. If you speak for several hours a day, you may have up to 2 million contacts, up to 2 million vibrations of your vocal folds in a 24-hour period. And that is a whole lot. Even if you are just kind of a normal voice user with not that heavy voice use, you may have several 100,000 contacts, vibrations of your vocal folds. And if you were to consider what would happen if you were to take your arm and tap it even gently several 100,000 times a day, that would make that spot a little bit tough and sore. So we don't want to treat our voice with negativity if we don't have to. So vocal warm-ups help get blood into the system, help things work a little bit well, and it just usually helps it to recover faster afterwards. So first, sirens are just what they sound like. You know, connect to your inner child and make a siren sound just like you would imitating a fire engine, for example. I love to use the vowel E, like the word squee, and just draw a hill or draw a swirl with my voice, something like this. And since you're all muted, you can try this along with me if you want to. But and you can do fast ones, you can do slow ones. And what that does, that literally stretches and releases the vocal muscles. They go longer for higher notes and shorter for lower notes. And that stretch is almost just like stretching your legs before you go out for a run. You can also do some humming. And you can do the same kind of thing where you do sirens, or if you hum a song. For humming, you really want to feel like the vibration in your lips. If you try it right now, you should feel your lips vibrating quite a lot. That gives us a good resonant sound in the voice. If you're not feeling that humming or that buzzing in your lips, try closing your nose, seeing if that does anything. Actually, it'll probably completely stop the sound. And see if that just kind of pushes the sound towards your lips. You can even just put your fingers there and see if you can kind of like aim your sound towards the lips, but we want to get a little bit of resonance there. Humming is great, and humming through a little song, you can do that in the elevator and people will think you're just having a great day. Lip trills or lip buzzes sometimes are something that people need a little practice with, but I teach it like it's how you make the little motorboat sound when you're a kid. Sorry if you hear my cat yelling at me. She's also practicing her sirens right now. But lip trills or lip buzzes are just and you make that sound with your lips buzzing, and you can do the same thing, sirens, or you can sing a little song. And just keep that going. Lip trills are great for a couple of reasons. And if you can't get your lips to do that, some people can use tongue raspberries and they'll do the same thing. But lip trills are great because if you can't get the lips buzzing, there's a couple of things that might be going wrong for you. You might either have not enough breath or you might have too much. It's almost a 90% chance that you're not having enough breath move through. And so if you get your breath going a little bit faster, a little bit more breath, that may help the trill to actually start working. And then you can think about how much breath was I using to get that trill. Use that amount of breath while you're speaking, and you'll have more gas in your system. So are also great things that you can do. The next thing uses a straw, and this is super easy. You can use all kinds of straws. This is one I think I got from Sonic. I don't remember. I love actually the McDonald's straws because they're just a little bit bigger. They have just a slightly bigger diameter than these straws. But you can use even a coffee stirrer straw to do this. But all you do is just stick the straw in and sing through the straw. All of these that I've mentioned so far, the sirens, humming, lip trills, and the straws, these are what we call semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. And all of these all create a backflow of air, a backflow of pressure in the vocal tract. Vocal tract is everything from lips to larynx. And what that does is it helps the vocal muscles to come together more fully, more cleanly, but in a relaxed way. It can be super helpful for relaxing the strap muscles here that your larynx is suspended from. Can help to relax everything. So if you're having a particularly rough vocal day where things are just a little bit tight, you can use some semi-occluded vocal tract exercises and help it to relax a little bit. My favorite SOVT is taking a straw and putting in a little bit of water, and trust me, you only want a little bit. I've got about an inch of water here, and you do the same thing, sing through the straw but blowing bubbles. and you don't want a lot of water or you're going to end up wearing it. But what that does is that actually increases the resistance, so you get a little bit more back pressure. And plus, it's super fun to blow bubbles. And so I use this one all the time for clients who are recovering from vocal surgery or who have had some pretty serious vocal injuries, because it's very gentle on the mechanism, but it also strengthens the muscles. So this is a great one to use if you find that you would love to strengthen your muscles without having to try to overuse them. So you want the bubbles to be constant and fairly even. So you don't have smaller bubbles when you're at low pitches and more bubbles when you have high pitches. That's kind of a fun thing to do. And of course, you can just sing a song. If you've got a song that you like, sing it. It can also improve your mood. And don't forget to cool down your voice as well. If you think about what you would do with your legs after you ran for a long distance, you would cool them down. You wouldn't just stop running. Cooling down the muscles is a great way to encourage them to heal. We do have some evidence, it's scant to be honest, but we do have some evidence that the voice recovers faster after a period of strenuous voice use when you cool it down. And I've got these exercises in an order from less strenuous or easiest to more strenuous or more difficult. And so if you just, if you warm up by going from the top of the list to the bottom of the list, you cool down from going to the bottom of the list to the top of the list, from more strenuous to less strenuous. That's a great way to cool down the voice. And you can use those exercises. You can get through them in about 5 minutes, and that's great for getting your voice warmed up before you speak. Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun presenting to you today, and I would love to take your questions. If you have any, if you'd like to know more about me, there's my website. I would be very, very pleased to connect with you there.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Nussbaum. We have some great questions in the chat. So let me turn my video back on here if I can. Remember how to do that. Okay, we've got just about 10 minutes left. So we'll just kind of dive in here. So our first question is kind of a multi-part question. This person says, you mentioned early on that vocal changes might be permanent if not addressed. And this person wondered, what window of time is that usually? They say they had 2 run-ins with COVID that did a number on their voice, and their ENT said that there was nothing he could find or do. The rest of that question is, what sort of therapeutic modalities could potentially apply to voice affected scenarios? And is there an advanced field or two under ENT or some adjacent field that might be able to diagnose or give some recommendations for healing?
Yeah, whew, that's a big one. And so you're not gonna like my answer, unfortunately, because just with everything with the voice, what can happen as far as changes in particular can be highly individualized, because it's a matter of genetics, it's a matter of severity. And so just as and now also like the type of something. As an example, if you had nodes, which are basically calluses on the vocal folds, that's much different than a cyst, which is can be usually a surgical problem. And so I would try to address things as soon as possible, knowing that especially right now, it's tough to get into a laryngologist because they're very overworked. COVID has done quite a lot of things to people. And frankly, we don't know enough yet about the long-lasting effects of COVID on the voice. We do know that like coughing is super hard on the vocal folds, and that can cause a lot of tricky little things that go on. I tell people that the clinical threshold is if you've had changes for more than 2 weeks to start to seek out help. It can be up to, it can be months before you can get into a specialist, though, just because that's the way our health system works. So the ENT that you said that he couldn't find anything or do anything, I would again make sure that you're actually seeing a voice specialist, and someone who is able to address voice issues. And if not, seek out a second opinion. Um, and if you can't get anywhere with an ENT, if your insurance allows it, or if you can self-pay, you might seek out a speech language pathologist. Again, SLPs can have specialties as well because they study swallowing, they study the voice, they study brain changes like through stroke. So not all SLPs are going to be familiar with the voice as well. So you might actually have a better chance of getting quicker help if you can seek out a voice specialized SLP. Um, uh, SLPs are usually able to scope the voice too, so you can get a good visual of what's happening there and just make sure there's no lumps or bumps or anything that's going on. Whereas not all ENTs will do that in a visit. So sometimes you may have to ask for that. Let's see, I'm just reading through, see if there's anything else. And if I see that you're anonymous, but if you have any more questions that I'm not addressing here, feel free to reach out on my website. I've got a chat button. You can send me a message. I'll try to respond to that, and think through it a little bit longer and see if I can get you any better information. Is there an advanced field or two under ENT that could, yes. You might also, and this is again where we don't know as much about COVID. I think we're going to learn a lot more in the next 5 to 10 years. After we've kind of got a handle on COVID, there because the respiratory system is also connected to the voice. There could be some benefit possibly to some respiratory training, particularly if you've had a lot of cough associated with your illness, because cough can also turn habitual. And by retraining the cough mechanism, sometimes that I've heard anecdotally anyway, that can actually help some people. So that might be another specialty to reach out to. Beyond that, unfortunately, I think we don't have enough information yet in this particular aspect of voice work. And it's just because it's so new and we're still learning so much. But again, if I didn't adequately answer, please reach out to me and let's talk about it a little bit more. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so the next question is from Tammy. Tammy wonders if medications can impact your voice, particularly strong pain meds. She says her husband has been hoarse or gravelly sounding, and he's a nurse and thinks it might be due to his medications.
Heck yeah, they can. I'm going to put a link into the chat. There is an organization, I think, is that that may be prescriptions. Sorry, I'm going to do it again. NCBS, the National Center for Voice and Speech, has a database. They just redid it spring of 2020. And you can search that database for all kinds of medications, including herbal supplements and vitamins. And they just added biologics as a category. You can search for your medication either by type or generic name or brand name. And if it's of course not entirely comprehensive, but it's pretty dang good. And so you can look at that database and see if there are any known vocal side effects. Pain medications in particular, most of, well, a lot of them, I would say, for instance, ibuprofen and Tylenol both have an increased risk of bleeding everywhere in the body. And so hemorrhage is a rare but known side effect of those types of medications. And that includes hemorrhaging on the vocal folds. And so basically that means the vocal folds bruise and your voice gets pretty gnarly with that. And so other types of medications like allergy medications and a lot of herbs like echinacea in particular are drying, and so they dry things out, and so you want to increase your water with that. If you have like the little insert for your medication, you might look for things like dehydration, things like a risk of bleeding, or they may list vocal side effects. Just look through there and see if anything could contribute to vocal changes. But that website that I put there is a really great resource for finding vocal side effects to medications.
Great, thank you. I did want to know, we're just about at 3 o'clock, but we'll
Sure.
go ahead and answer the questions if you're able. And
Mhm.
folks, I know some of you probably have to hop off and get on to other meetings. We are recording this session. If you're registered, which if you're here, you're registered, we will send out a recording. So if you have to hop off, not to worry, we will send out that recording so you can hear the end of the questions. You mentioned, we hear you say the phrase vocal folds. Karen wondered if that's different than vocal cords, than the term vocal cords.
Great question. And no, they're basically the same thing. We tend to say vocal folds in my field, so that's what rolls off the tongue because the vocal cords, vocal folds, whatever, are multi-layered, and the term cord tends to imply like one little thing, but we call them folds because they're literally tissue that's like folded over each other. I actually just wrote a blog post about this like 2 or 3 weeks ago about terminology, specifically addressing vocal cords versus vocal folds. So you can find that on my website, Dr. Heather Nesland/blog. And Karen, since I know you, I think I might have your email address somewhere. I'm not real sure, but if I remember and if I can find your email address, I'll send it to you because I explain why that particular term. Most people call it vocal folds. I call them vocal cords. I call them folds just because that's what I'm used to because I'm the vocal nerd in the group.
Thank you. Okay, Melisha says she's had the experience of speaking and kind of sort of losing her breath and having to stop and take deep breaths. Do you have any recommendations for her?
Yes, I have a feeling, this is a feeling, we have a tendency, now I did talk about increasing your breath support, but sometimes people can actually stack their breath. And what I mean by that is that singers do this all the time. I'm guilty of this as well, but we will take in breath and then we won't use all of the breath that we have, but we keep taking in breath until like everything is just like super full, and we actually have to stop, breathe out, and try it again. So, but it feels like being out of breath. And so that might be part of the issue. And one way to do this, and this sounds kind of silly, but it might actually come down to a matter of practicing a little bit. Try practicing and taking in enough breath and using all of it before you take in another breath. You can do this by even just like getting a book and reading aloud and working on how much breath do you actually need to take in without it being too much. And being able to kind of manage how much breath that you're using. Now, if it's not breath stacking, if it's actually a matter of running out of breath, you may need just to take more breaths more often. I do this too when I get excited, where I'll just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk until I am absolutely out of breath. And what happens is at the end of my breath, everything gets super duper tight because I'm just trying to squeeze it all out until I get to the end of my sentence. To fix that, it may just be a matter of slowing down, taking more breaths more often, so that you are not trying to have to run the gas tank out of gas before you fill up again.
Okay, our next question is, what are some of the ways we could keep our voices lubricated? This person says they've heard of steaming, drinking lemon water with honey. Wonders if you have any other suggestions.
Sure. The best way to do it is to drink early, drink often, especially when we're considering water. Although just about anything that you take in that's liquid is good for the voice. I mentioned that you want to preload the water into your voice, and so you want to consider about drinking enough, the day before or the morning before you have an afternoon meeting, that kind of thing. Steaming and even nebulizing, that's actually a different way to deliver water into the system. Those are both topical ways to lubricate the system, because you are basically kind of like shooting water on top of the vocal folds. That can be a temporary fix. It can last anywhere from a few minutes to a couple hours, depending on just how much you're talking, how much air is moving through, because the air will dry things out. The best way is to lubricate from within by staying adequately hydrated. I would caution against lemon or anything that has a lot of acid in it, particularly if your body does not respond well to acid. Note that just that nothing you drink actually touches your vocal folds. That's what we call choking, and we try not to do that. The best way is to drink ahead of time, so that you have enough coming from inside the body out onto the vocal folds.
Great. All right. Michael says he's learned that some types of flooring can affect sound quality, and that having layers on top like carpets and rugs can improve how our voice comes across on a Zoom call versus in a concrete warehouse. If we don't want to attract dust by adding carpets and rugs to surfaces, what kinds of additions could be added to the floors?
Oh, this is a super great question and also very complicated. Because room acoustics are a big thing. People make big bucks in order to do it, to optimize rooms. So you're absolutely correct. If you think about just simple basic things, anything that's hard is going to bounce sound around. And so a hard wall with nothing on it is going to reflect sound. Anything that's soft is going to absorb sound. And depending on how soft it is, what kind of material it is, it will absorb it at different rates. You could, if you need to absorb sound in the room, you could put some pillows around or hang some fabric, even curtains. Curtains are great because you can, like if you want a little bit more absorption, you can close the curtains, and if you want a little less, you can open them so that you have the hard window for the sound to bounce off of, so that can be adjustable. If it's not necessarily a matter of how much sound is in the room, you might try also playing with how the sound bounces around the room. If you have just parallel walls like I have in here, for instance, the sound's going to basically just bounce back and forth in straight parallel lines. If I wanted to bounce the sound around the room, and if you go into like a concert hall or sometimes even into like a sports arena, you might see that there are curved panels or panels at different angles along the walls or on the ceiling. And what that does, those are sound diffusers. And so the sound bounces around the room. It makes the sound waves go in different directions. And that diffuses the sound without actually dampening it. And so that can be something to experiment with too, maybe having doors at different angles so that the sound bounces around a little bit differently. Having even some like things on your desk that are at different angles than just parallel against the walls can bounce the sound around. Something to experiment with, just what's in your room, what's on the walls, and how the walls are shaped can affect how the sound is.
Very interesting. Thanks. Michael had one more question. How is it that people like Tony Robbins are able to yell for most of a day for multiple days consecutively? He said he was at one of Tony Robbins' events, and he said he's usually yelling for 50 hours a weekend.
I would say if you listen to Tony Robbins' voice now versus what it was like 20 years ago, you would note that there have been changes. And so he hasn't gotten away scot-free. He has a pretty gravelly voice. He's also using amplification. And so he may have the quality of a yell without actually yelling, because his voice is also a big part of his brand. And so, he probably has built up the muscles to be able to do that. I personally would not want to. I think that would be kind of hard. But I would say that, yes, he probably does do that. But if you listen to the quality of his voice right now versus how it was 10 or 15 years ago, you would note that there have been some vocal changes that may not have been the most positive thing ever. But yes, he can, but not without consequences.
Karen wonders how long we should be doing those vocal warm-ups you suggested.
Great question. I would say at least 5 minutes or so. If you know that you're going to do a lot of speaking, like for a full day at a conference, I would do it longer. And I would actually probably even do like a midday kind of check-in.
I'm so sorry. I need to step away just a second if you can handle the questions in the chat.
No problem. and so, do about 10 minutes or so, maybe even in the middle of the day if you have to do a lot of talking over the course of the day. And then do about half as much time for a cool down. The cool down is actually very, very important for vocal recovery. And here's where life is just not fair. But I find, and I think there's good research to back this up, that the older you are, the longer you really need to kind of warm up so that the voice has a little bit of a longer chance to get going. That's just a matter of the physiology. As we get older, unfortunately, we just need a little bit more time. But pay attention to your body. If you're feeling pretty good after a couple minutes, you're probably just fine. Okay, any tips for helping people not get flushed or blush when speaking? Oh, I wish I knew because I do, unfortunately. I don't have a great answer for that, unfortunately. I wish I did. That's probably more of that's actually a neurological reaction. And unfortunately, I do that as I do that. I wish I had the answer because boy, that would make me happy if I did. All right. So sorry about that. The next one I'm going to read. From what you've observed, how much change and improvement can someone's voice undergo with daily vocal warm-ups when working with you? I also have a family friend in his 70s that has an autoimmune condition that's paralyzed one of his vocal cords a couple of years ago. Can that be reversed with training or in combination with other forms of support? Fantastic questions. So the first question first, how much change and improvement can the voice undergo? And if you and I were to work together, just as an example, we would first identify what are your goals? Where do you see the improvement needing to happen, and how much improvement do you want to do? Because people have different goals, and my goal as a vocal instructor is to help you reach your goals rather than me imposing my goals on you. But how much change? Usually there is quite a lot. And usually at first it doesn't take very much time before you start to see some improvement. And you can get more vocal stamina, more strength, a larger range, that kind of thing, usually fairly quickly. And then it's just a matter of being habitual about it, practicing, because I can't inject improvement into you. You honestly have to do the work on your end. I'm more the guide. You are the one that actually does the work. So how much change really depends on your goals and how much you put into the process. The second question about paralyzed vocal cords. Uh, there are ways to improve it, but usually when the cord is paralyzed, it's because the nerve has been damaged or is dead. And nerves don't generally regenerate, particularly in the vocal folds. They don't generally get to, they don't regrow, at least not at a very rapid rate. Again, clinically, we give vocal changes about 6 months if they're neurological like that, because if the nerve is simply diseased or injured, they heal very slowly. And so we say usually if the change is after 6 months, that's what you're going to have. And that may or may not be true. The body is a mystery. And so the nerves are going to do what they're going to do. However, there are procedures that you can do if you have a paralyzed vocal fold. And really what that means is that and it's almost always on the left side, but that isn't always the case. But you have muscles in the back of the vocal fold. Sorry, if you can see that pull the back of them together, and one of those sides is not working. And so in order to combat that, a surgeon can actually move one of those vocal folds over so it's closer to the middle, and then the one that's working just comes to meet it. And the one that's paralyzed is just kind of sat in place, and you can get good voicing through that. You can really get some good results. It's often a surgery that's done while a person is awake so they can kind of test it out to see how it goes. But there are things that you can do. Just simply voice training on its own usually does not improve the vocal fold function if the nerve is truly dead or too damaged. So unfortunately, that's not great news, but there are some helps. It's called medialization. Is that particular procedure that can move the vocal fold over. I'll type that into the chat so you can um, it's a medialization procedure. That's again where you would want to see a voice specialist to talk about it and see if they might be a good candidate. Because autoimmune disorders can be just tricky and bodies sometimes just don't cooperate. That's a really long and in-depth conversation with the surgeon to be able to do that. Okay. Alrighty, I think, is that, let's see, Tammy, did you, I think somebody put the other, the website into the chat again. So if you didn't see it, I'm sorry about that. Last question that I see, there was an incident where I yelled extremely loudly at someone a few years ago, and my voice has never been the same since. This 1 minute overextending of my voice a few years ago. Is the damage done or is it reversible? Fantastic question. And unfortunately, the answer is I don't know. One of the things that you'd want to do first is to have someone scope you, and that could be an SLP or a laryngologist to really get a physical look at the vocal folds. Otherwise, we're just guessing, because it could be that you created a cyst at that moment. It could be that you created a hemorrhage at that moment, and based on we can't guess. Or we can't decide which of those types of things might be the issue without physically looking at them. And so when I talk about being scoped, that is, there's a couple of ways that we can do it. One is through a flexible scope that goes through the nose, and it's a camera at the end of a flexible wand, and it goes through the nose and hangs down in the mouth and uses a strobe light to look at the vocal folds, how they function, looks at them physically, and usually they ask you to speak or to sing a little bit and see how the vocal folds work. We also have a rigid scope, which is just a big long stick with a camera on the end, camera and a strobe light on the end, and they like, you open wide and they stick it in the back of your mouth and look down through there. Unfortunately, there's not a super great way other than sticking things in your throat to take a look at your vocal folds. But to get scoped is really the first step that I would take to see what is going on there physically. If you had a momentary change that has persisted, I would be very surprised if there wasn't something physical that happened. How much change might be possible after you know what's going on is going to be a matter too of what kind of injury there is, how much the voice has, or how much the vocal folds themselves have perhaps calloused or scarred from that, because they can scar from some sorts of injuries. And so unfortunately, I can't give a great answer, but the first step that I would encourage you to do is to get a good scope of your voice so you can really see what's going on down there, because you won't be able to get to a resolution, whatever that happens to be, without knowing exactly what you're dealing with. Treatment for various things are going to be dependent on what kind of pathology is down there. Okay, let's see. I think those are all the questions right there. I see, let me just check on the chat, see if there's anything else before Katie comes back. Otherwise, I will just vamp for a while until she does. But if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'm happy to address what I can. Okay, let's see. Good, okay, she got that website. Hi, Michael. Thank you very much. Do I have future presentations? I don't, but I would be very interested in doing that. And other classes that I offer, most of the time I'm working with voice teachers. And so I'm talking about pedagogy topics. For instance, this month I'm doing a presentation I call Pedagogy Happy Hour, where I am talking about adolescent voice change. Most of us know that our voices change when we're going through our teenage years, and that can be a bit of a tricky minefield. So I'm doing a presentation on when to panic if you've got a teenager. Some ways that you can know how it's what's just wonky and when you should be worried. But as part of that, I'm also giving a little bit of some tips on how to prepare your voice students and their parents for a visit with an SLP or laryngologist. And so that's part of the presentation. I do Instagram lives and stuff, mostly on pedagogy topics, specifically to voice teachers in particular, but you're welcome to follow along and see if that kind of content is for you. I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is Dr. Heather Nelson. Thanks, Karen. I appreciate you being here. But those are the kinds of things. Voice science is my jam, and so I'm talking about it all the time. And if you have in particular topics that you'd love me to address, I would really be interested in knowing what would be helpful for you. Thank you for coming, William. I appreciate it. Let's see. I do have a blog as well, but again, my audience is mostly other voice teachers, but you're welcome to follow along. I'll put that into the chat too so that you can see that. I post different topics kind of every week-ish or so. But since Katie is not here, there's still a few people here. Any other questions or any topics that I can answer, or we can even try some vocal exercises or whatever. Michael asked, are the classes, they are targeted towards voice teachers, but they're open to anybody. Let's see, and I do have a newsletter. Let me see if I can find the link to that real quick. I'm actually behind this month and I haven't got my letter out this week yet. I needed to work on that. There we go. I need to work on that today, but it's probably not going to happen. But this is the link to sign up for my email list. It usually has links to things that I've written and things that videos that I've done, stuff like that. So if you're interested in voice science, that could be something fun to kind of follow along with, just knowing that my target audience for that is other voice teachers. So I tend to do a little bit of talking amongst the family in that respect. You'd be welcome to follow along. I did some my topic last week. I usually have a weekly topic every on my socials and in my blog and stuff. Last week I discussed depression and singing, because depression can affect the voice. And this week I'm doing a research roundup and just talking about different research things that I have been following along and reading and stuff this week or this month, because I can't stop reading science about the voice. So that has been my topic. Okay, I don't know. Let me see if I can send that straight to you. I'm not sure if I can or not. I tried to send it to you as a private message in the chat, Michael. I'm not sure if that worked or not. Great, awesome. There's also ways to sign up on my website, so you can, if you boop around a little bit, you'll find it eventually. And let's see, I don't see any other questions, but I'm just kind of gonna hang out until Katie comes back. So you are absolutely welcome to ask me anything, even if it doesn't have to do with this topic. I enjoy talking about the voice very much. So you are welcome to ask me anything that you would like. Alrighty.
Hello.
Hi. Okay. Sticking my hand out into the chat one more time. And then I think we've been through all the questions.
Okay, very good. I apologize for having to step away. We had an emergency here in the library.
It happens.
Thank you so much for sticking around to answer all those questions and sharing your expertise. I learned a lot of new things today. I bet everybody else did too.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope we'll see you at our next Tuesdays at 2. Again, you can visit swmissouri.score.org to sign up for those. And we'll see you next time.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson.
Sure.